So, what up, what up, what up, what up, what up? Today is a good day. So, today we are going to be doing a review on the animated history of Brazil. Um, for some people who don't know, I've studied jujitsu since I was 18 years old. I started with a guy named Soneca, Everilton Silva in Massachusetts with the Fight Club. And I learned a lot from him. I really appreciate it. But I grew up in Massachusetts, in Brockton, Massachusetts. I got myself in a little bit of trouble. I had to move to Marlborough, Mass. Marlborough, Mass has a massive amount of Brazilian population. And it was real cool because I got to learn about the Brazilian culture and I got to learn a little bit of the language. And I was super curious about the and I made a bunch of friends. Shout out to Diego and Jose and Angel and Vadeci, a lady I used to work with, was the one who actually taught me in Portuguese. So, eu falo somente que tem que falar devagar. My favorite phrase means I speak a little bit, but you got to speak slowly so that I can understand you. All right. So, without further ado, let's get into this video, and I hope you guys like it.
This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Use the offer code Sweeney to get 10% off your brand new website.
The subtitles are actually in Portuguese. Sweet.
In 1493, Genoese sailor Christopher Columbus returned to Spain with news of undiscovered islands.
Okay, real quick. So, I love these little animated videos because they remind me of old Fisher Price little people used to have back in the day. So, let's go. Oh yeah, bro. All right, so here we go.
Later recognized to be the New World. 5 years later,
Columbus.
Portuguese sailor Vasco da Gama successfully rounded the Cape of Good Hope and found a southern route to India. The age of exploration had begun. The two rival kingdoms met together and drew two lines on the globe dividing the world into two spheres, with monopolies granted to a Portuguese half and a Spanish half. While the Spanish set about conquering the New World and the Portuguese established a trade empire in the Indian and South Atlantic Oceans, either side were aware of the small piece of the American continent which lay in Portugal's half of the globe.
They really do remind me of that. I feel like I'm gonna have to go buy like a little vintage piece now.
Before European discovery, South America was inhabited by numerous Native Americans who had migrated from the north either by land or by shallow coastal sailing. We aren't entirely sure. These early migrants lived in harsh conditions in the most diverse.
Yeah, I want to highlight that what he just said. We're not entirely sure because there's been so many speculations of where these native tribes came. But I will say, for myself, this whole area, I believe, gives a third of the Earth's oxygen, if I'm not mistaken, something crazy like that. So it kind of makes sense that maybe stuff started around here. Don't know, speculation.
Bioecosystem in the world. These native groups subsisted.
What's up to everybody who's on chat?
But there were some hunter-gatherer communities as well. And before you ask in the comments, yes, there were some cannibals. Most of these tribes lived on the
yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good point to highlight that there probably was some cannibalism. A little wild. I don't know if I want to be around at that time, but there you go.
Coast and were broadly categorized into Tupi and Tapawea, although the diversity did not make too much of an impression on the Europeans. Here to help me out with early Brazil is Joe from the channel Jabsy.
Upon Vasco da Gama's successful return from rounding the African continent in 1499, the Portuguese decided to begin trade in the Indian Ocean. Pedro Alvarez Cabral left the following year for India. Getting blown wildly off course during his southward voyage, he sighted land on the 22nd of April 1500, and a few days later landed at Porto Seguro. They named the locals they met as Indians, just like the inhabitants of the West Indies. But although nearly 95 times its size, Brazil's population
kind of makes sense now that they would call the West Indies Indians. Oh, I didn't realize that it was that far back.
Was just short of Portugal's at just under 3 million. This land was east of the Tordesillas line, and so was declared for Portugal. The locals traded with the Portuguese for pau-brasil, a wood with a red dye used in Europe, but the trade post was seen as largely inferior to the colonies in Africa and India. However, when the French began importing Brazil wood themselves, Portugal made a more concerted effort to settle in the area. And for the second part of this collaboration, visit my channel at Jabzy with the link on screen.
It makes sense that wood was one of the main things that they were taking
Early
out as an
Brazil
export.
was divided into 15 colonies and granted to wealthy Portuguese elites. The only successful one, however, was São Vicente Island.
15 colonies. Literally right here. So I'm assuming that everything this side was originally in Spain. Saying, right?
Which made a moderate profit buying native slaves. So the failing colonies were returned to the Portuguese crown in 1549 and a governor was appointed. Merchants and missionaries were the first to settle. They built a capital city, Salvador, and began trading in the Todos os Santos Bay, mostly in the new cash crop, sugar. To help promote the economy, a group called
Very similar to Puerto Rico. Sugar is one of the huge exports.
Bandeirantes was sent to explore the land for minerals and slaves, which increased settlement for the export economy. Slaves became more valuable as natives died from European diseases in large numbers. Missionaries were also very active at this time, mostly Catholic Jesuits who founded the city of Sao Paulo as a missionary school just a few kilometers inland from Sao.
Okay, so I always wondered why Sao Paulo had like the big Jesus statue. Let me look that up before. That's Rio de Janeiro. Okay, so I'm super wrong. I apologize about that. But I wondered where their history came from, like such faith. So here we go. Maybe this will.
Vicente. Another bay, Port January, was established as a French colony called Vilcanhon Island before the Portuguese kicked them out and renamed it São Sebastião do Rio de Janeiro. When Portugal got busy during a succession crisis in Europe, the newly independent Dutch Republic very briefly swooped in and took over large parts of the colony. It didn't last long, but it did inspire them to put more resources into settling Dutch Guiana. The Atlantic slave trade was kicked off by the Portuguese, buying them on the coast of Africa and importing them to Brazil, where they were sold to plantation owners.
Okay, so this right here makes sense because like these guys went this whole side of the. It's unfortunate to see that happened, but without it, like cultures.
More than 40% of all African slaves were imported to Brazil. For comparison, just under 5% were imported to the United States. Brazil grew rapidly during the 1600s, creating new export markets for native plants as well as new plantation commodities like tobacco. The system was held together by the Royal Fifth, when 20% of all minerals, crops and other products went directly to the Portuguese crown, accelerating the establishing of public offices like tax collectors, accountants and governors. When gold was discovered in the 1700s, the slavery economy boomed, and exploration of the interior was accelerated to look for new minerals. They opened up new markets to trade with the Spanish Empire and the Rio de la Plata, but when this area became overrun with pirates and smugglers, the Spanish and the Portuguese met to establish a shared border control in 1750.
Okay, so Peru was massive. Way bigger. All right, I want to see how those borders change.
Brazilian culture was becoming increasingly more diverse. Europeans, Indians, and slaves met to form mixed-race groups called pardos, such as the mulattos, cafuzos, and mestizos, with countless numbers of Creoles and ethnic identities. Brazil was to become much more important to the Portuguese crown in the 1800s, thanks in large part to Napoleon. When the Iberian Peninsula was invaded and occupied, the royal family legged it to Rio, where they set up the government during the war. After returning to Lisbon, the king's son, Prince Regent João, declared Brazil independent and crowned himself emperor. A brief independence war ensued where the Portuguese found themselves battling not only the Brazilian army, but also thousands of civilian militia.
That seems like
familiar?
that would be a problem.
The Empire of Brazil, however, failed to enact the changes that the wealthy landowners and the liberal elites had overthrown the Portuguese for in the first place, and so the nation was plagued by socialist insurgencies, slave rebellions, and even a republican movement in the Rio Grande do Sul, supported by the Italian nationalist Giuseppe Garibaldi. They spent thousands on wars with the newly independent South American nations as well. Investment in Brazil showed no signs of slowing down. Coffee, which grew extremely well in the Brazilian climate, became the new cash crop, as well as markets in timber and rubber.
Okay, so now we've watched their trade go from being mostly sugar, coffee, timber, rubber. It's interesting.
Actually, the rate of immigration to Brazil was so high that it obviated the need for slaves, and the practice was ended in 1888.
Okay, so I love hearing that. All right, so the slavery ends because there's massive amount of people migrating to understand. They were already mixing so much from what we saw a little while ago and creating almost their cultures. That's fascinating.
The empire came to an end inspired by the ideals of republicanism and the Enlightenment, and soon a military coup placed Deodoro de Fonseca as the country's first president, the United States of Brazil. Jabzi, whom I collaborated with on this project, covered over on his channel the Vargas era as well as the military dictatorship that followed, which led Brazil into the 21st century. So check that out when you're done here.
Beautiful
Brazil
flag.
is not a simple nation. It is full of social struggles, an amazing
Okay, so
triumph
this
of
is where I made the error earlier, but
nationalism,
let's see.
a complex political structure, and a nation at the top of the ladder of the world's most popular game, football. Your website need not be complicated. Squarespace makes building a website immensely easy with easy-to-use tools, simple design layouts, and creative domains. How about a website for your wedding in Rio at ourrio.wedding? Or document your vacation at
so-
myBrazil.holiday. There are so many possibilities. That's Squarespace over at Patreon. Check out Jabzi's video.
All right, cool. So that was an interesting insight to Brazil, and kind of its foundations. I'd like to go even deeper down with that because at a certain point, I know even they obviously have a rich history and very beautiful. And for me, like say that's one of the places that I want to visit in the world. Made a lot of friends at that place. I've a lot through martial arts. Been awesome. So that being said, I'm going to end this video. I'm going to continue to stream, but I'm going to be doing another video as I'm playing. I will see you guys